here, but our main message here is you're not on this journey alone. Once we end this set of 4 sessions today, we have a lot of ways that we can continue to talk to you and help you work in deploying and driving adoption of Viva Connections in your organization. You don't have to remember all of these. Your customer success manager is the one that's going to help you determine which of these make sense for your organization. And then if they need support, they come to us. But there's lots of ways that we can help you move forward. So I mentioned this is our agenda for today, so we will get started. Before we get into kind of like a light architectural overview, I do want to cover Viva Connections at a high level in case we have anybody who's joining for the first time, or if you've forgotten, because life happens and work happens in the last week or 2 or 3, and maybe you forgot what we talked about. So this is Viva Connections that we're looking at. Our example, Rela Cloud site. It's meant to be your single place to connect with news, conversations, and resources. You can tailor that experience. We use audience targeting, but you can tailor that experience to different geographies, business organizational units, different employee job roles, but make this experience personal to the user so that they're seeing information and applications that's relevant to them as a person and not just kind of generic things that everybody is accessing. So it's really nice to be able to tailor that experience. You can brand the experience, so you have options with your logo, with colors, with the name, so that you have some of your organization's brand or identity there. It is personalized, so we'll talk in a couple of slides, but essentially information is coming from Viva Engage, it's coming from Stream Video, it's coming from your SharePoint Online News, and all of this is being prioritized, and there's an algorithm that's deciding what content to present based upon all of the information about that user. So it could be attributes that they have as an employee, like what is their job role, what organizational unit do they work in, what country do they live in, what communities do they belong to in Viva Engage. So a variety of things, but what's being presented to them is unique to them. You can also extend Viva Connections by developing custom components. So we'll talk about that later in today's session, but we have dashboard cards that let you bring information into our application functionality right to the employee within this app. And that way, it's not just Microsoft apps or web links, it's actually things that enhance the employee experience and make it easier for your employees to get to things. So we covered all of those great ideas last week in our session on recommended practices for adoption. You're really leveraging your investment. So because we're using SharePoint, and I forgot to update this one to Viva Engage. So if you're not aware, we are renaming all things Yammer Viva Engage. Yammer joined the Viva family last year, so this rebranding is in progress now. I will update the slide, but whenever we say Yammer or Viva Engage, we're talking about the same thing. And then obviously that's supported by all of the security, compliance, and identities that go with Microsoft 365. So it's just taking advantage of what you've already put in place, and that'll be a common theme that we talk through today. For Viva Connections. So as we talk through the dashboard cards that we looked at in the prior sessions, there are partner cards available so that if you're using things like Workday, ServiceNow, other applications, your partner or third-party vendor may have cards already available. So that means that's work you don't have to do, you don't have to build them, and you get immediate benefit. So when we talk about the different parts of Viva Connections, it's pretty simple, which is nice. We basically have 3 main components. We have the dashboard, so that's those cards that we talk about. If you've done technical reading, these are sometimes referred to as ACE cards, so that means adaptive card extensions. But for general audiences, I just like to call them dashboard cards because they're cards that go in the dashboard. So we'll keep it simple. But these are the things that either present information, allow you to complete a task, sometimes both. But these are the things that we think are really critical, that give value to employees by having all of those things in one place and eliminating many clicks or many steps to getting that data or performing tasks. Our second part is the feed. And so this is populated by our Stream Video or Viva Engage or Yammer content, and then our SharePoint Online News. And so that's all coming from those other services in Microsoft 365. And then last, we have resources. So if you've heard us talk about global navigation in SharePoint Online, which we talked about and shown in prior sessions, this is kind of like in the old days, we called it mega menu, but it's just your links to resources. And these also can be tailored by audience. So it's nice that you can get quick access to things that are commonly used that are specific to you as an employee. And so once again, just to kind of think about these things as we move forward, because everything really centers around it's either related to the dashboard, the feed, or the resources. So this is kind of a service mapping. I was hoping for a fancier graphic, but could not find one or create one. So we're gonna go old school today. But basically, this kind of shows you for the element on the left of Viva Connections. And so I've actually added just one. So we basically have three things in the middle that we talked about. We have the dashboard, our resources, and our feed. And then we also have the Viva Connections app. So you've seen our presentations before. The Viva Connections app is a Teams app. And so there's that layer of the solution. And then we have our dashboard cards. So they go on the dashboard. And so we'll kind of talk through these one at a time. So the Viva Connections app is a Teams app and managed in the Teams Admin Center. So everything that you're applying, Teams policies, pinning apps and Teams, all of that applies to the Viva Connections app. So it's just treated the way any other Teams app would be treated. Our second item is the dashboard. So that's what we looked at here. I'm going to go back, but this one on the left. So it has all of our dashboard cards. So the dashboard page that holds that configuration, like how the cards are arranged, how the audiences are filtered, that's actually stored in SharePoint Online. So you edit the dashboard in SharePoint, it's stored there. When we move on to our resources, that's our global navigation in SharePoint Online. And so you edit it there, it's stored there. So that's that SharePoint service as well. The feed is probably the most complex as far as components. It has content coming from three places, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. You'll have your SharePoint Online News, you'll have Viva Engage or Yammer content coming from the communities, coming from storyline posts. If you're using some of our premium features, you'll have like Leadership Corner, you'll have different things showing up in your feed. And those could be posts, it could be questions, polls, whatever's presented based upon the ranking of importance. And then the last element is stream video. So like, for example, we have our Teams meetings are automatically going to stream and available there, but we also have, we can save, upload videos and publish them through stream, have corporate videos, excerpts from town halls, whatever those things are. And those are available in that feed as well. And there's no management of those because there's an algorithm that's kind of providing that ranking. There are things you can do to influence them, which we've talked about before, but there's no management layer. So the nice thing is your feed just kind of works and there's nothing you need to do to make those things happen. And then last, we talked about the dashboard cards. So to go back to our picture, if we look at our picture, there's 6 cards on this picture on the left. And so those are the things we add those one at a time. So there's a few different types. You can add first-party Teams apps. So think approvals or shifts if you're familiar with those. We have third-party providers. So we mentioned on the previous slide, there's Workday, there's ServiceNow, there's many partners that have added Viva Connections dashboard cards as part of their solution. They sometimes come from our app source site. And you can add them that way, or you can also sometimes, like I think for ServiceNow, you actually go to the ServiceNow portal to get the dashboard card component and then add it to your SharePoint environment. And then the last option is a web link. So you can have a dashboard card that simply points to a URL. And so like if we look at each of those, the first party Teams apps, they're managed in the Teams Admin Center, so pretty straightforward. For the second two, regardless of where you get it from, it's being stored in something called the SharePoint Online App Catalog. If you're not in IT, you don't have to worry about this. Your IT friends will cover you. They know what this is. And then last, there's no configuration for the web links because they're simply pointing to a web page. I do have some notes here. So we talked, I think it was week 2, we discussed the original experience that was very intranet content focused. And it looked kind of like what we see on this laptop, if that's visible to you, but it looks very much like your intranet. And then the new experience, which looks very much like the mobile experience, which is more simple and is focused on the dashboard cards. So if you're using the experience that's more SharePoint content focused, then you'll want to have these things in place. So the single asterisk, it means that that's required when you're building Viva Connections to have more of the focus on SharePoint content. If you're using the new experience, then it's not required. And then for the 2 asterisk item for Viva Engage or Yammer, and then the stream video, those are not required. You need to have SharePoint News for your feed as like a minimum requirement, like some amount of content being published via SharePoint News. But we think it's better when you add Viva Engage, it's better with video. So like, it's just, those things aren't required. We know we have customers that haven't adopted Viva Engage yet, so maybe they go live with Stream and SharePoint Online, and that's completely fine. But we do think it's best when all of those things are in place. My presenter from last night actually suggested this slide, which I think is great. So for our customers that are using Viva Connections, the question is like, well, what's the difference between my intranet and Viva Connections? And so they have slightly different purposes, although Viva Connections is using a good deal of content and information and configuration from what's in your SharePoint Online home site. So you can see in the middle, like all of those things that you built are being leveraged by both Viva Connections and your SharePoint portal, your intranet, whatever terminology you use. And so there's still a role for each, but we highly stress the importance of those dashboard cards, because that's where you're saving your employees time, you're making their jobs easier, you're letting them get information quicker, or they're able to complete tasks. Maybe they're submitting, their timesheet at the end of the workday. Maybe they're exchanging a shift with somebody. Maybe they're filling out assessments. Maybe they're in a manufacturing scenario and they're putting a quality check-in directly from the app there, and they're not having to leave Teams to do that. So we think that app-based experience is like our ideal outcome for Viva Connections. Obviously, every organization is going to look at this different, so we're not going to tell you you're doing it wrong. Like, we have customers using Viva Connections in a variety of ways, so it's really just a matter of figuring out what works for you, and that's why we're here. I don't see questions in the chat. All right, I'm going to keep going. So we're going to switch over. So we're going to talk security, compliance, governance at a very high level. So we're not going to get super deep because we have about 30 minutes left in our content session, or probably about a little less than 30 before we get to Q&A. So we just kind of want to cover things at a high level. And we're happy to take questions, and also happy to have deeper conversations to follow up after today's session. So the nice thing, and honestly, the best thing about Viva Connections from a security perspective, it's inherited from Microsoft 365. So it's coming from all of the security controls that you put in place for SharePoint, for Viva Engage, for Stream Video, and Teams. So like your policies, your data protection, like everything you have that's already applied is being leveraged in Viva Connections. You don't have to do anything extra for security. It's going to take advantage of what's already there. Now, if you're building a completely new brand new SharePoint Online environment, then you'll have to do a little bit more work. But generally speaking, if you've got SharePoint Online already, if you're using Viva Engage and Teams, you've already gone through that process of determining what your security requirements are, how it's configured, your roles, your processes, all of that's going to be leveraged in Viva Connections. For Viva Engage or Yammer, I think it's still in the admin center. It may be called a Yammer enterprise license, but make sure that that is assigned and in use, because that's the way that you're able to use your admin tools to configure all of the security around the Viva Engage or Yammer service. So it's included, like, for example, your E3 license or E5 license. So it's already there, just making sure it's assigned and that those elements are set if you're using Viva Engage. So if we look at the SharePoint Online content, so we know that our dashboard's there, we know that our news is coming from SharePoint Online. So it's going to have the same permissions, the same access, regardless of whether you're using the SharePoint mobile app, whether you're using the Viva Connections Teams mobile app, Viva Connections on your desktop, SharePoint in your web browser. It's all the same set of permissions. So there's no access that is different because you're in this Teams app. The only thing that we recommend is if you're using any third-party or custom developed dashboard cards, like you probably want to do some additional security review that would be part of your normal, process for evaluating vendor solutions or for any in-house software development standards. So it shouldn't be anything different than you're already doing. It just means that those cards are not coming from Microsoft. So there should probably be an extra layer of security because they're not going to fall under that umbrella that I mentioned at the first point. So those things are not included in the security that you have through Microsoft 365 because they're reaching out to external systems. And then last, and this is really just a tip, the global navigation, so the menu is links that you add, and then you can filter them to an audience, but it's not doing permissions checking. So there's potentially a situation where somebody sees a menu item that they don't have access to. So it's just making sure that you have the audiences set right so that people don't see those items. They're not going to get access to them, but as an end user myself, I always get annoyed when I see something to click on and then I get access denied. So that's more just making sure that the items that you're sharing in your navigation are in line with the permissions. All right, we will move on to compliance. Still see no questions. So this is all across Viva. So this content is not specific to Viva Connections, but applies to Viva in general. And this actually applies much more to Microsoft 365 overall. So in the scenario of the cloud, we are the data processor. So we're storing your data, we have built-in security, we have compliance, and we'll see some of the compliance regulations that we're supporting, and we have privacy by design. So we take that very seriously, and we work very hard to maintain that. On the other side of that is that it is your data, so that the data that you're putting into the cloud service is your responsibility. So any privacy concerns, other concerns, obviously, it's your data. So you have the responsibility for the data that you're putting into the service, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So as I mentioned, this applies to all of Viva. So you can kind of see here where Viva Connections, Viva Learning, and Viva Topics all store content in SharePoint Online. And because in some of our scenarios, some of you are using Viva Engage. So like you'll see the Viva Engage and Yammer. So like its legacy platform name, you'll see that there as well. So those would be the two things for Viva Connections. If you're using Viva Engage, then you'd have Yammer and SharePoint Online as those services that would be impacting your compliance for Viva Connections. And so if they're set correctly in SharePoint Online and they're set correctly in the Yammer Enterprise Administration, then you will be remaining in compliance. So these are some of the standards that we support. So the SOC 2s, or Systems and Organization Controls, it's covered within the scope of SharePoint Online. It's not currently called out. I expect that will change as we move forward. As much as it seems like I've been doing Viva forever, the product has just reached 18 months, so it's still new. So I imagine that our reports will start to call out Viva specifically in the very near future. We do support GDPR, so all Viva apps that are built on Microsoft 365 are in compliance with the GDPR requirements, and so there's additional information that you can access at these links. We have an entire site about data residency. Because it's complicated, we won't cover it here, but there's a link here that will let you see, like for your country, for your region, where your data is stored to make sure that you're in compliance with any local regulations that you might have for data residency. And then last, we have Microsoft Purview, which is our data governance, risk, and compliance solutions. And so Viva Connections is actually inheriting e-discovery and data retention from SharePoint Online. So any files, content that are involved in the services are also within the scope of Microsoft purview. And then there's a longer page here, site for Microsoft Viva Compliance, and there's a clickable link. You can click it now. You can also access it later when you view the deck. All right, still no questions. All right. I realize it's not as exciting as showing like Viva Connections and all the cool things we do with it, but necessary. So when we think about governance, so it's really monitoring, controlling, and so we think about what are the things we need to govern. It's really three things. It's a part of our SharePoint Online Intranet, so not all of your intranet is coming through Viva Connections, but part of it is. It's those dashboard cards, and then it's our Viva Connections Teams app. So we're going to walk through each of these briefly to kind of talk about the key things. So I'm not going to read the slide to you, but like these are the things that when we talk to customers about putting a SharePoint intranet in place, like these are the topics we would cover. So the vision, the policies, all of the things, how it looks, how long content stays out there, roles and responsibilities, super important one, how you measure, how you provide training, how you support it, all of those things that you see here. There's a great article that kind of covers these in more detail, but this is kind of like the superset of things for Viva Connections. So you'll need to consider these if you're putting up a SharePoint intranet for the first time, but if you're not, you've likely addressed these things already. This is really just here in case you're new to SharePoint and are looking for some guidance to get that intranet up and running to support Viva Connections. So if we filter it down to Viva Connections, what do we think about when we think about governance of our online intranet or home site, specifically around Viva Connections? So it's really just these things on the right. So it's which content items are shown. So we're talking about like the landing page of your intranet. So think about, you know, which web parts do I want there? How do I want to present my news? How do I want to present other information? Do I have events? What should employees see on that page? So that's the big question. And a lot of this, I will say, is focused on customers that are using the original experience, which looks like this here on the left, where it's very much your intranet page that's very content focused. So this will be a little bit less important if you're using the new experience. And I will show that we spent a lot of time on it in week 2, but I will bring it up again just for reference. So for the things we need to consider, it's like who sees the content item. So like when we think about what's on the page, are we filtering content based on audiences? So that way people are seeing news articles and items that are relevant to them based upon their job role, their country, their organizational unit, whatever those things are. How often content items are updated or rotated. So that's super important. People don't come back, as you're probably aware, if there's static content out there. If I go to our intranet and it hasn't changed in like 2 or 3 weeks, I'm probably not going to go back. So the same applies to Viva Connection. So making sure that the things that are out there are relevant and timely. Determining the items that go in your global navigation. So if you're using that global navigation with your SharePoint home site, then having that menu of options, like what should be there, and then like the next point being who are those audiences. So I could have a link to an internal system that only applies to employees in, let's say, my operations unit. And so I could filter it to just employees that work in operations to see that link. And so that way, the rest of the organization doesn't see something that's not relevant, potentially something that they don't have access to. And it just makes the navigation smaller and still more relevant for each employee. Determining which sites are official organizational news sites. So in SharePoint, there's a way to make a site an organizational news site. Your home site is that by default. So you have at least one if you've put in a home site, but your news sites are official news. They get special designation visually. So you'll see that it comes in as company official content. It gets a little bold title in the news feed. So I think it's either 50 or 100 that you can have, but like determining which ones are going to be those official sites is important, so that way, as employees see content, they might pay a little bit more attention to official posts than other things in their feed. Determining who's allowed to post and boost news. So one of the ways we influence what shows up in the feed is boosting news. It makes it have a higher prominence in the feed. It's the way we make sure that important things are seen by people. But obviously, when everything is important, nothing is. We want to make sure we understand who is in permissions to boost the news on each of those sites, so that we have like a balanced number of boosted news postings. Once again, when everything is important, nothing will be important, and you will have achieved nothing. And I'm sure everybody's had those conversations about what goes on their intranet and what's important and what needs to be on a menu somewhere just because they think it's the most important thing. And then last, determining the groups which should see news items from each news site. Like they're going to be things like HR, benefits, different units that everybody wants to see news from because it's applicable to them. But there's going to be other places where, like, for example, I work in customer success. If there's news coming out of maybe engineering or marketing, and it's not related to Viva at all in my job, then I probably don't care about that news. And so I probably shouldn't be in the audience for that. So using audiences to identify groups that see content from each of those organizational news sites is really helpful. So that was our content. And so if we move on to our dashboard card, so once again, just for a little bit of visual, we've moved to our cards. And so just like that, they have a little governance around them. And so the things to think about, trying to get back to my, is who, for each of these cards, who is my audience? So does everybody get this? Like, so if it's something, I'm trying to think something that's not country specific that would apply to everybody. I'm hard pressed because most of my cards are like tailored to me. Hold on, I'm looking at my Microsoft Viva Connections. Oh, actually, I have a really good one. So it's performance review time here at Microsoft. And so that is something that applies to every employee. So the audience for that card is everybody in the organization. However, we might still only show that to certain people at certain times of the year, but that audience is going to be everybody. But then there's things like company holidays, and I can filter if my dashboard card is filtering holidays, then that's great. But if it's not, then maybe there's a card for US holidays versus UK holidays. So once again, making sure that the audiences are right. Determining if they're permanent or seasonal. There are going to be some cards that are there all the time, and there's other things that are going to be seasonal. So we have benefits enrollment in November. We have performance reviews and connects at certain times of the year. We have our gift campaign in October. Those are seasonal card examples. So we won't see them all year. We'll just see them at the time of the year that they're relevant. And then that frees up space for other cards so that it's always new, it's always engaging, and it's timely. Making sure that you're monitoring support for dashboard cards provided by vendors. So it's really making sure that if you've chosen to implement something from a third-party provider, understanding that they're committed to keeping that card there, that they're partnering with Microsoft, just to make sure that, you know, your card doesn't become unsupported a year out. Nobody wants to have that difficult conversation and then figure out, do you have to build something? Do you take it away? Just kind of making sure that anything you're doing there, and also what the support process is. I've been in situations where there's lots of finger pointing. Microsoft says vendor, vendor says Microsoft, and as the customer, you just want it resolved. So understanding what the support process is when those things don't work. And then last, your custom dashboard cards, although quite simple, as far as, you know, the technical components, they are still custom components, and making sure that they're just part of whatever enterprise processes you already have in place for software development. So just making sure they're being treated the same as anything else that you would build. And then the last thing we apply governance to is that Viva Connection app and Teams. So as I mentioned before, there's a few things, and we'll look at this in a demo environment shortly, but these are the things that you can configure for the Viva Connections app. And you could also apply policies to show it to only certain people. And there's also the pinning, but these are kind of the key things you can set. You can change the app name and icon. So if your intranet has a name and you want to use that, You can also change the logo. I've seen a few weird instances where like the icon reverts back to the Viva Connections logo. That may have been a bug at the time and may be resolved. But in some cases, we just recommend using the Viva Connections, leaving the name and icon there so that it kind of stays in branding, like especially if you're using other Viva apps. But once again, like that's just more perspective and not a requirement for sure. All right, so let me get this going. Vishal, do we have any questions?
Not yet.
No questions yet. Just logging in. Sorry, my computer had to be rebooted to update this morning, and I lost one of my logged in sites. All right. We'll be there shortly. All right, so let me share my screen. So PowerPointing is going away. All right. So let me bring up the Teams Admin Center. So I'm doing the Viva Connections app configuration just to kind of walk through what that looks like. So this is access from the Teams Admin Center. I'm just starting at the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, but you can go directly to Teams. So it's just admin.teams.microsoft.com. So either way is fine. And then once we're here, we're just going to look at the Viva Connections app. It's a little slow. All right. I don't know whether it's my computer or if the cloud is quiet quitting on us. All right. It's not letting me type. Oh, all right. I think everything caught up. Okie dokie. Sorry about that. It's a little bit longer than planned. So walking through here, it just kind of tells you what your permissions are. There aren't any settings. And so if we look at our customization, so these are the things that I had on the previous slide. So you can change the name, you can change the description. I would recommend changing the description for sure so that it makes sense to your employees. These things are really important. So if you've got existing policies in place for privacy, for your intranet usage, any terms of use for your employees, like this is where you would want to replace that with what we have in our privacy policy URL settings. And then you can change the connection. There's specific standards for these icons that we have documented, so you can't upload and replace the icon. And then there'll be like your color icon, your outline icon, and you can set your colors. And so this will give you a little bit more of a branded experience. And then if we look at this within Teams itself, the other thing that we recently added and would only apply if you are using the new experience that we talked about, I believe in week 2, is there's a background image that you can put on the app at the top at the banner. So we'll look at this here in a second as it loads. And I apologize for the slowness. I don't know why it's being quite so slow. All right. So you can see here, we're still using the default logo, default colors. This environment hasn't been customized at all. I just built it a few days ago. And so if we click here, the other thing we have available that's done through the app itself and not through the admin center is you can change the background image. And so I'll see if I can upload something here quickly. Give me 1 second. I've got some, oh, I actually need to go to Viva. But I'm going to upload like a Viva background and we'll see what that does. All right. Okay, so I added one of our Viva pillar logos, and so you can see it's got like kind of a little greenish tinge in the background. You can change where the focus point is of that picture, but I'm going to leave that alone. And so then you can save it and it applies. So that's the other element that you would want to apply like from a branding perspective. And there's a little overlap obviously between branding and governance. But those are the elements. And as I mentioned, if you're using the original experience, you're seeing this. So we see our SharePoint content here in the main part of the page. We see our company feed. So those things that are coming from Viva Engage and SharePoint and Stream. And I see my dashboard cards over here on the right. And then if I want to click back to my dashboard focus view, then I can do it that way. So that's kind of what we're doing. I will say we actually released a message center message recently that we are moving this feed based upon a lot of feedback. We're actually moving the feed from the right to underneath the dash to the lower part of the page. And that way employees are able to access the dashboard cards and see more of those at a time. Mine is probably a little bit bigger because I'm on a wide screen, but for a lot of people, they're only seeing like 2 or 3 cards in the dashboard section. So by moving the feed to the bottom, it should give them a much better experience. So that is a change that's upcoming in the near future. All right. Vishal, were we having questions or are we still good? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So that is that. Let me swap back to the presentation. Unfortunately, PowerPoint Live is never smart enough to remember where I was. All right, so we're going to talk about dashboard cards. It says dashboard card development, but it's really more kind of like principles of dashboard card design. For if anybody's looking to do more detailed dashboard card development, we have a great workshop that we offer through customer success. You can talk to your customer success manager about it, but you actually like work with the engineers or architects to build out a couple of dashboard cards and like do that together, which is a great way to ramp up quickly. So just for context, we're talking about these happy little cards in the middle that point to information and or actions, tasks, application content. So kind of our 3 guiding principles is to integrate rather than duplicate. So you're wanting to just provide access to stuff that's there. You don't want to start, like you don't want to recreate something in a different way. Like in many cases, you can leverage what you've already built. So you know, task assignments, you know, like your to-do tasks, planner tasks, those sorts of things, shift schedules, policies, so, you know, basically just integrating what's already there. 2, to stay in context. So you can stay within the context of a card. I did this yesterday. We have what we call Perks Plus Fund that lets us get refunded for like gym memberships, ergonomic furniture. So we have like a certain amount allocated every year. It's a very nice benefit we have. But for the first time, I used Viva Connections to do my reimbursement for my gym membership. And I stayed in Viva Connections from start to finish, submitted it, uploaded my file, set all the different information, such as who I purchased it from, how much it was, the date, all that good stuff, and stayed completely with the Viva Connection. So that was really nice because previously I was going to our HR site, clicking on benefits, clicking on Perks Plus, and then going to the vendor site. So like that was 4 or 5 steps I didn't have to go through. So really, really nice, use of the technology. So once again, just message there being like keep people where they are. So like let them complete their task or view their data from within Viva Connections. Don't make them jump out and bounce back and forth. And then last, obviously, make the information and the applications relevant and then also dynamic, so they're refreshed. So the thing that I probably see change most often is our training dates. We have a lot of learning requirements here at Microsoft. So I always have a card. I would say many months of the year, I'll see a card that says you have required training due at the end of this month. And so that's one of those things that are nice to have. It's always changing. You can link it to project data so that you can see maybe project status, task assignment updates, your remaining vacation days, personal time off. We have, all sorts of things, but once again, it's dynamic. So it's going to be relevant and timely. So if we talk about the anatomy of a card, there's only 4 aspects of it. So it's really simple. So the container is the square. So it's the card itself. And so all the content sits within that. The card has an icon, and so that's the unique visual representation of the card. You can use predefined ones, or you can upload your own. The app name for your title, they should be in sentence case, so mixed case. And then last, a heading, that's going to be your visually prominent text on the card. So that's the key information. So if somebody doesn't do anything else, like, so for my learning example, it's like, you have 2 courses due by May 31st. Like that would be the heading text. So like that would be the important information. So that if I didn't click, I had still at least got the key message from that dashboard card. There's 3 layout options when you're laying out the cards. So the first one is just a heading. So you simply have the icon or logo, you've got the title, and you've got the heading. So if that's all you need to communicate the information, this is really simple, really easy. When we go to the second layout option, it's when you need additional information that maybe makes it more clear. So in this case, I have the paid time off available under 15 days. Maybe it's something like you have 15 days, maybe the description actually says you have 10 days of personal time off and 5 days of medical leave, whatever those things are. But it's just in a case where having additional data would be valuable for clarification. And then the last option is our heading plus image. We all know that images tend to draw attention. They have visual impact, especially if you're using logos, icons that people are familiar with, so they know what that means. It should be very clear that it's related to the purpose of that card. So I will say that from my personal experience, the thing to consider when using these 3 layout options is to balance your text with images. Having a page of all text dashboard cards is not going to be very visually engaging. But at the same time, if you had all heading plus image cards, they would be very visually busy and like maybe overwhelming. So kind of using a mix of those types will result in a very good user experience and just visually appealing and simple. Simple is good. When we talk about interaction, and this is the last point, we're good on time. When we talk about interaction, there's 3 ways to interact with a card. So like you can make the entire card clickable. So I don't have to do anything except click on the card. You can also add buttons, and you have primary. You can see that has like the bold color for the button background and white text. And then it's the converse for a secondary button. So kind of reflecting, the prominence or the importance of that task. And, I like the example here because like log vacation, like that's kind of a doing thing. So I like the use of the primary button for it because you're actually doing a task, performing a task. And then the view details using the secondary, I think is nice because I'm not doing anything. I'm viewing more information about what it's telling me, but I have this visual cue that when I click on this, I'm not actually submitting a vacation request or time off request. I'm just seeing what the details are of my time off status. So it's nice, and you can use these as they make sense, and then also just take into consideration things for across your device types of mobile, tablet, and desktop to make sure that, for some people, maybe the use of these buttons makes it a little bit harder. So maybe if you have a lot of mobile apps, like for certain cards, maybe you use it where the entire card is clickable, just so that, say I have a small phone, it might be really hard for me to navigate to that button space on a smaller device. And so these are just some examples. So closing out the topic of dashboard cards, these are some examples, and you can see the mix of, I have the heading with image, I have the heading, and I have the heading and description. So I have that mix of card types. You can see the mix of under tutorials, that's where my interaction would be, where the entire card is clickable. And then you can see I have the primary button for clock in, so I'm completing a task. And then the self-check, so something maybe a little bit less action-oriented. Your tasks are due today, view the task. We're using the secondary button. So once again, just using those options for the best experience. And obviously, we're not going to teach you to build a dashboard card in 10 minutes. So I've included a link here that would be a great way to get you started independently about learning about how to build these cards, using the ones that are already available, the Microsoft Teams apps, the website links, and then also how to build your own. But we really hope that you'll reach out to our customer success manager that's invited you here, and maybe consider a workshop on building those cards yourselves, or include other members of your teams.